The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. This is taken from one of my favorite TED Talks delivered by Chimamanda Ngozi called The Danger of a Single Story. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And while the message in her speech is very powerful, what you and I can take away from it is the public speaking lessons that we can derive from her speech. And the reason why we chose this particular speech is because if you see the speech in general, either if you've not, putting a link in the description below, check it out. It's one of the most powerful TED Talks I've ever heard. Anyways, when you do see the speech, you'll notice that it's not traditionally a good speech. What I mean by this is that there wasn't much stage movement, there was no gripping introduction. In fact, she was even referring to her notes constantly while she was delivering her speech. And by breaking all these so-called rules of public speaking, she still managed to give a powerful message in TED Talk. So we're going to break it down and talk about the 4 things that we can take away from her speech and apply into our speeches, presentations, or even our day-to-day conversations. Hey, my name is Radeep and I'm the founder of Frantically Speaking, and I love learning about effective communication and sharing those learnings with you so that you can level up your communications game as well. So there are 4 points that really stood out to me from her speech. The first thing is a technique called the nested loops. What this technique essentially states is that when you say a speech, you break down the speech into multiple stories, but you do not complete any story. And she did this really well when she told us a story about her childhood, about a roommate, about her college professor. She told us all these 3 stories without really giving them a proper end or conclusion or takeaway. And this is a really powerful technique because it helps persuade our audience from different angles. It makes sure that we're using different stories and different perspectives to actually bring them back to the same point. Throughout the rest of her speech, she kept referring back to these stories to give us a truer perspective on the danger of a single story. So the next time you have a speech or a presentation, try and divide up your entire narrative into different story chunks and use the second half of your speech to circle back to those stories and give away your main conclusion or takeaway. The next thing that we can take away from her speech is personal experiences. The fact that most of her speech was drawn on from her own life is what made it so powerful and persuasive in the first place. And I've seen so many speeches, and I've been guilty of this myself, where we rely so much on secondary research to include in our speech. And that's fine as well. Research is important and we need to back up our claims with some sort of facts. But it's only when we draw from our personal experiences that we build something called ethos, which is credibility as the speaker. When she spoke, it was very obvious that all of the things that she was speaking about came from years and years of her own experiences, which is what made her message so much more persuasive. The third thing that we can take away from her speech is humor. Now, humor has always been a challenge for me to include in speeches, but the way she used it made it seem so simple. If you were to watch just the beginning part of her speech, notice how many times she makes the audience chuckle. And if you've tried incorporating humor into your speeches and it's not really worked out well, what usually might be the case, at least what happened to me a lot, is that when I'm trying to be funny on stage, I'm drawing those comedic styles from people who I look up to. Comedians, my favorite sitcoms and stuff of that nature. The problem with that is that it reduces our own authenticity. Even if we're not saying the same things as they did, by copying the comedic styles, we might be taking away from our own personality. In case of Adiche's speech, the humor fits in so well because she's not really trying to be anybody else. And the more I observe and learn about humorous speaking, the more I understand that the less we try to be funny, the more opportunities of being funny actually open up. And it's a lot easier to fit in humorous elements when you're not really looking to make the audience laugh. The next time you're trying to incorporate humor in a speech, don't try and write it from the get-go. Write down your speech as is with your main message in mind and then try to sprinkle on some jokes that fit in more seamlessly than they would have if you were to start with the intention of wanting to be funny. And the last thing that I want to talk about is delivery. And this kind of circles back to what we said in the beginning, that even though she broke so many traditional rules of public speaking, her delivery was still so powerful. She might naturally not be a very outspoken person, but she managed to find a way to amplify her actual personality to make her message and delivery that much more powerful. I hated when people tell me to just be myself with regard to public speaking because while I get what they mean, it doesn't really help anybody. So we're going to try and break that down a little further. The first thing to keep in mind to help find our personality on stage is to simply do it as often as we can. And I know this is a very tedious way of going about it, but the more stage time we're able to grab, the faster we'll be able to find that sweet spot which balances our own personality with what we need to communicate our message clearly to the audience. So if you're naturally introverted, if you're naturally soft-spoken, there's no need to actually change that. We just need to find a way to amplify that. The next thing that makes her delivery so powerful is that she she simply spoke very clearly. Her words were so articulate, and the way she paced her speech made it very easy for the listener to comprehend her message. And that's something that's relatively easy to practice. Now, if you're a naturally fast speaker like me, you're going to find it a little hard to do this, but essentially we need to try and practice with a much slower pace. We need to become a lot more comfortable with pauses and silences. And we don't only need to practice this when we have a speech, but we need to practice this in our day-to-day conversations as well. The more we learn to pause and the more comfortable we become with silences, the easier we'll make it for the listener to comprehend our message. And the last thing that made her delivery so powerful, despite all the negatives, was simply her content. Her speech was backed with so much experience and research that it just made the entire presentation so much more persuasive. And as long as we have that, as long as our content is backed by experience and research, and we actually bring value to the listeners, people will be willing to give their time and attention to us. And that's essentially it. It's why I love her speech so much and just wanted to make this video so that we can draw so many communication lessons from her speech, despite just the main message she wants to give out, which is the danger of a single story. If you haven't watched the TED Talk yet, do watch it. I highly recommend it. And if you have any more questions when it comes to things like public speaking, communications, or anything in that space, we have in-depth resources and articles dedicated just for that. So go check out franticallyspeaking.com.